Our app is looking pretty good at this point. The last thing I want to do for right now is to make sure that we deploy all of our latest changes over to Heroku. So we've gone through this deployment process several times now, and it's going to be no different this time. So I'm going to change back over to my terminal. I've already killed my server, and I'm going to first check and make sure that all of my work is ready to be committed by running git status. So here's a list of all the different files and folders that we've created and added or changed since the last time we committed. We'll then run git add dot to stage all these changes for commit. We'll run git commit -m and then a commit message for which I'll say users can see survey results. I think that's good. And then finally, we will push all these changes off to Heroku with git push Heroku master. Okay, so that's going to start up the deployment process and kick off that whole thing that we've now gone through several times at this point. Now, one last thing I want to talk about around deployment, just as a quick reminder, when we put together our SendGrid webhook, all that configuration over here. So I'm at the SendGrid dashboard right now. I'm logged into SendGrid. I'm under the settings tab, mail settings, and you'll remember we went through all this stuff with event notification. I want to remind you that at this point, our SendGrid account is sending everything on over to that local tunnel webhook that we set up. So this local tunnel thing is going to direct traffic specifically to our laptop. So in order for all the SendGrid stuff to work correctly in production, like over on Heroku, we would need to make sure that this webhook instead looks over to production. Now, of course, we probably want to have the ability to test out our changes or test out changes to our application on our development environment, and then also have the same application running in production as well. However, SendGrid unfortunately does not allow you to add multiple webhooks to use as addresses here. So in order to really make everything work properly with our application and SendGrid, you really need to make a second account, and then set up webhooks on that one as well. Now, we've gone through the process several times now of setting up duplicate resources for development and production. So for this, I'm going to say, you know what, I'm going to leave this to you. If you really want to go through and make sure that the webhook works correctly on development and production, I'm going to leave it up to you to, make this thing happen. But I do want to remind you that as it stands, if you deploy the application right now to production, webhooks are not going to work because this is pointing over to our local server, our local development environment. So you'll want to change that if you want to really have a finalized version of our application over on Heroku. Okay, so enough of that. Now going back over the terminal, it looks like deployment is complete. So we'll run Heroku open to check out our application and just make sure everything is working to some reasonable degree. Okay, so I will go over to my dashboard. I don't have any surveys right now, so I'll make a new one. Now I certainly can make surveys. I'm just not going to receive any of the click events from the SendGrid account. So we'll say test survey. I'll use dev.emaily@gmail.com again. Next, send survey. Okay, here's the survey. And then I should be able to go over to my email inbox and see the test survey pop up. Cool, so it looks like everything is working very well on production as well. Now, certainly I could click this link right here, but again, I'm going to say it for the third time in a row. Remember that the webhook would be sent to our local environment rather than to the Heroku application, which is what we probably want. So I'm going to say it for a third time, I'm going to leave it up to you to take care of that. Okay, so at this point, this is pretty much, where we conclude the main development of this application. Of course, however, there might still be tons of different features we can add to this application. And you're probably thinking, Steven, what? That's it? Like, aren't we going to do XYZ or XYZ? Well, you know what? Obviously, there's a ton of different features that we could possibly add to this application, but we've already been talking about this app for a very, very good number of hours. And so at this point, I'm going to say that I'm going to give you a couple of different options on some ideas on how to expand the app, and I'm going to let you kind of take it away and do some development on your own. Now, when I give you these suggestions, I have not necessarily gone through and implemented all of them inside the application by myself. So I'm not necessarily going to be able to, help you in great detail if you ask me a question about how to do one of these expansions or one of these extra features I'm going to suggest to you, but I can at least give you maybe a little idea or two to get started if you have no idea on how to do it. Okay, so of course, do feel free to drop me a line if you feel like you are completely stuck. But again, this is kind of the point where I want you to have the ability to add on some extra stuff. Okay, so here's a handful of suggestions on how to add additional features to the app. Now, of course, this is not at all an exhaustive list. There's a lot of different things we could do to the app, but these are some kind of relatively straightforward changes that are still relevant to the application that I've rated in terms of difficulty. So I want to give you a quick description of each of these possibilities. So we'll go from the first one down. So this first feature is something that would really be around the front end of the application, and I'm going to say that it's easy to add in. Now, easy is entirely relative. When I say easy right here, that is relative. In other words, this might really be hard. This might be hard to put together, but compared to the other stuff on the list, it is easy. So it might be hard, but relative to the other stuff, it's easy. Okay, so for the first one, front end, it's pretty easy to do. Just improve the design of the survey list card. So basically, that component that we just put together right here. Clearly, this is not pretty at all. What we're looking at right here, not pretty. And I think this thing could use a pretty good amount of work to kind of make it look a little bit better. So some quick suggestions, maybe rather than showing yes and no vote totals right here, maybe instead we show a nice bar chart that kind of says here's the number of yeses and this is the number of no's, or maybe show like a pie chart or something like that. In addition, we're currently showing the sent on date, but you'll recall that inside of our survey model, we are also recording the last responded date as well. And so I think it'd be pretty easy and pretty straightforward to also tell the user, hey, here's the last time someone responded to this thing. And then besides that, just the styling in general could use a little bit of help. So I think that would be a good, easy place to get started on the front end aspect of the application. Now, next one is towards the back end. And I say back end because that's where most of the work would be going into, but there's definitely going to be a front end component to it here as well. Now this one's going to be easy. I'm going to say add in the ability for our users to be able to delete surveys that they have created. And so this goes back to traditional CRUD applications or CRUD routes like create, read, update, and destroy. At this point, we really just have create and read. Obviously, it would be kind of nice to be able to give our users the ability to delete surveys after they have created them. Next, this is a feature for both the front end and the back end. So maybe allow users to specify the from field on survey emails. You'll recall that right now, whenever we receive an email inside of our inbox right here, the email is always marked as being from noreply@emaily.com. Now this field right here is 100% customizable when we create the actual email. And you recall that we specified that inside of our mailer, inside of our services directory. So here's services, mailer.js, and inside of here we specified from email, and we passed in the string of noreply@emaily.com. Now that's not something that's super ideal. Like in reality, it might be nice to allow these people who are creating surveys to dynamically specify where responses should be sent to. Because if, it's great to have these yes and no buttons, but chances are that our users would also want the ability to capture text input from their users as well. So maybe we would want to make sure that they could, write in some response here and then send it to some actual email that the customer gave to us. And so this would definitely be something that would be a little bit of work on both the front end and the back end of the application. So essentially, we would want to make sure that the survey creation form had a spot to add in the from address. We would want to make sure that that from address was stored in our survey model. And then we would want to make sure that we use that from address whenever we put that mailer together. Now the next one is specifically on the front end. This is around medium difficulty. And so this is a little bit more on kind of the classic React and Redux side of things. Basically allow client-side sorting of surveys. So we had just said, hey, let's kind of flip the order of all these surveys and make sure that the newest ones show up on top. It'd be kind of nice to have maybe a series of buttons up here that allows the user to sort the surveys by the date they were sent, the date that someone last answer to it, or maybe the number of total votes or something like that. That kind of feature would definitely be probably very well appreciated by our users. And then finally, this is the mega one. This is front and back end, and it is very much very hard. So I'd originally wanted to put this feature into our application, but I'll tell you, it probably would have added at least like 5 hours worth of video to do all this stuff. And so at the end of the day, I decided, it's just a little bit too much. We could have done that, but if we did it, we would have had to drop some other features. So it was kind of a trade-off here. So this feature that we were going to do in this course, but we eventually kind of dropped out, was to allow users to create surveys in draft mode. So I want you to imagine for a second that you are using our application and you go to create a new survey and you start filling this thing out, and you've now put a lot of work into your campaign title, your subject line, and your email body right here. But maybe you decide, you know what, it's the end of the day. I don't want to do my recipient list. I want to figure this out at some point in the future. But you might not want to lose all of the effort that you've put into all these fields over here. And so this feature suggestion would be to allow a user to create this survey in draft mode, or in other words, kind of like have a button here that says save and attempt to send this thing out later. Don't send the email right away, just save a draft of it right now. We will allow the user to come back later, enter in the full recipient list here, and then click next and actually send out the survey. So in other words, give our users the ability to create a survey without emailing it, and then come back later on and edit the survey, make changes, and then eventually send it out and email it off to all these different people. So again, this would have been, it's very hard. I would definitely classify this as hard because you're gonna have to do a lot of kind of digging on your side to figure out how to approach this. But I wanted to throw it out there as a possibility of something that you could probably expand inside the application to add on and give yourself that edit functionality. Okay, so again, just a couple of high-level suggestions. This is not an exhaustive list. I just wanted to give you a couple of ideas on how you might continue to work on this application. So at this point, I think that we're pretty much wrapped up with the application. So that's pretty much it. I hope you enjoyed putting this thing together. It was a lot of fun to do, a lot of fun to put together. I hope I didn't repeat myself too often through the course. I apologize when I do that, but you got to keep in mind that when you're listening to someone talk about something for so long, you kind of sometimes need that repetition to remember things. But hey, I'm not going to I don't want to make excuses at the very end here. So I hope you enjoyed the course. I hope you enjoyed the app. And I hope to see you in another course at some point in the future as well. So I'll catch you later.